Hi there guys, got a video here for you today on the BRK Ghost, and what we're going to be doing in this video is making some small improvements to the trigger of the rifle. Now the standard trigger is perfectly serviceable. It is a nice adjustable two-stage trigger, although there are a couple things we want to slightly improve on. The first is removing some of the side-to-side play present within the trigger blade. So if we pinch the trigger blade, move it side to side, you can feel a small amount of play there. We're going to be trying to remove that. The second thing that we're going to be doing is making the trigger a little lighter. Now I don't have a trigger weight gauge, so I can't show you the before and the after, but we are going to be replacing a couple of the springs in the rifle to try and make the trigger a little lighter. What we'll do first is remove the trigger, and I'll show you our plans. The first thing we'll do is remove the trigger plate from this side using a 2mm Allen key. With the two screws removed, we can flip the rifle on its end and then push the safety out from this side. Next thing we can do is remove the trigger blade. With that removed, we're going to pull out this pin here, and that will allow us to remove the trigger assembly. To do that, we're going to be using some pin nose pliers, just very carefully removing the pin. Now they can be fairly tight, so we're just going to be nice and careful and remove it. Right then, with the trigger removed from the rifle, we can show you our plan. So if we put the trigger pin through the hole there and then give the trigger pin a little wiggle, you can see that there's a little bit of movement between the pin and the trigger blade. To remove this, what we're going to do is drill out this hole here, press in a new bush, and then ream a hole through the bush to suit the pin. The pin is 2mm in diameter, so we're just going to be reaming a 2mm hole through it. What this will do is remove any play between the trigger pin and the trigger blade. So we're going to be doing that. The other thing that we're going to be doing is making the bush a little wider than the trigger plate. So if we have a look at it there, it's about 7.7mm. We're going to make the bush about 8mm wide. This will just help further remove any end play between the trigger and the block of the rifle. With that said and done, I'll take you over to the mill and we'll get the job done. And here we are over at the mill. So the first thing that we need to do is get centered up on the trigger pin hole. To do that, what I've done is put a 2.1mm drill bit in a drill chuck, and we're just moving the X and Y axis of the mill until the drill slides in the hole nice and easily. Now the 2.1mm drill is a nice snug fit in the hole, so once that slides in, we know we're centered up on the hole. Once we're centered up using our drill bit method, we can lock off the axis and start drilling out the hole. The final size for the hole will be 4.5mm, and to get there, we're just drilling out in stages. We need the hole to be nice and parallel and a consistent size, so that when we go to put our bush in, it will be a nice consistent press fit. If we just drilled the hole out in one go, we may end up with a hole that's slightly tapered, so it's tight at one end and loose at the other. So we're just coming through with a series of drills until we reach the final size. The last thing we can do is use a slightly larger drill and just put a chamfer on the edge. With that done, the trigger is ready to accept our bush. So I'll get that pushed in off camera, and I'll bring it over to the bench and I'll show you the finished piece. And here we have the finished component. So if we take a look at it here, we'll take our trigger pin, push that through the hole. As you can see, it still rotates around it nice and freely, but there's no longer any play between the pin and the trigger. So I think we've successfully solved that problem. The next thing I want to mention is that it's slightly wider, so it's about 8mm wide, whereas the trigger is about 7.7. And again, that's just to help stop the movement side to side within the block. Now whilst we have it here, I do want to mention that this is one of my trigger blades. Now this isn't the same as the FX one. The FX one and this one are slightly different in that the pin is a slightly different diameter, so the FX one won't fit on the Brocock. These will be available very shortly from Bagnall & Kirkwood, but the FX trigger blade won't fit on the BRK Ghost. The other thing I want to mention is that we've replaced the trigger spring. So this is just the first stage trigger weight spring. This one is the original, this one is the new one. So the new one's just a tiny bit shorter and the wire is a slightly thinner gauge. So that's that. Another thing that we did is polish the trigger sears. So the pins on this unit here can just be pushed out nice and easily. Once they're pushed out, you can remove the sears and polish up the faces. Now I will say that, like all trigger sears, you can make the trigger unsafe or not function correctly if you change the geometry of the sears. So if you do end up polishing your trigger, just make sure that you take as little material out of it as possible. You only want to clean up the faces, you don't want to change the geometry of the trigger. But our one's been polished up, so I wanted to show you that there. With that all said, we'll get this put back into the rifle. So the first thing we'll do is add the trigger spring to the trigger itself. Drop in our little brass cup, put the spring over the top of it, and then we'll line the hole in the side of the trigger, this one here, with the hole in the block. With it in rough alignment, we'll take our trigger pin and push that through the hole. It may take a little bit of wiggling to get everything lined up and pushed into place. And then the last thing to do is install our trigger plate over the top of it. Getting the 2 securing screws installed and then done up with a 2mm Allen key. With that done, the next thing we can do is put the cassette back into the back of the rifle. So we're just going to slide that in place. And then install the 2 securing screws, getting those done up with a 2.5mm Allen key. With that done, we can check that the trigger still latches. So pull it back, still latches. And once we put the rifle on fire, it does fire. So if you've done any work to your trigger, and when you put it all back together you find that the rifle's no longer cocking, there is a simple adjustment in the back here. So if we take a look at it, we'll flip the rifle up, get you in nice and close. And if we take a look at the back here, we have our second stage adjustment, and just behind that there is an additional Allen key which can be adjusted using a 1.5mm Allen key. So if your trigger is no longer latching, what you need to do is loosen this screw about 1/8 or 1/4 of a turn at a time until your rifle cocks. So what I'll do is I'll do it in about a turn. Then you can see there the rifle no longer cocks. So we'll just come out 1/4 of a turn at a time until the rifle cocks again. Then we can let it off, give it a few dry fires just to make sure that the trigger is still working as it should. Then do the same with the rifle up the correct way. So there we have it. So with a new trigger bush installed, the springs replaced with slightly lighter ones, and then the trigger cassette at the back polished up, we've made the trigger, in my opinion at least, a little better. It's a little lighter. We've no longer got the excessive amounts of side-to-side play within the trigger, and overall it just feels a little nicer to use. Unfortunately I don't have a trigger weight gauge, so I can't show you the before and after, but with the changes that we've made, it's noticeably smoother and lighter. Now the other thing that I wanted to mention is that we have replaced the hammer spring and we have rebalanced the valve. So replacing the hammer spring has lightened some of the load on the trigger sear, and that in turn has made the trigger a little lighter as well. However, I'm going to be going over that when we actually do our full disassembly of the rifle, so I'll go over that at a later date. For now though, we'll get the bottom plate installed and that'll be that for this video. So we can get the 3 securing screws done up with a 3mm Allen key. And there we have it. That's about going to do it for this video guys, so thanks for watching and we'll see you in the next one.